Let's make some conjuration abilities so we can have examples for the Nen optimization videos. The first thing I care about designing Hatsu is how much the algorithm makes sense. If you think of everything being made of cycles, even physical objects can only be defined in cyclic contexts. Life energy is a way of conceptualizing how much ability some cycle has to function and keep pushing through the interconnected world. Living beings need to take in the stamina and potential of other currents and circuits to keep their own body systems functional, and people shape it into aura because cycles are location specific. You can't override all of reality from a single location because your actions collide with and chain react into the things that surround you, and the power they have is that energy. So likewise, things are able to reach you depending on how they're able to impact the specific place where you are, which means you can optimize your power by spreading your energy to block off as much of the area around you as possible, like insulating a room to keep it warm without any extra sources of heat. Because now you're projecting your impact on other things to be a cushion that counteracts opposing forces before they reach you. So now you can afford to use your excess stamina to set off chain reactions in your favor based on what your brain can think is a conceptual way to apply it. Nen ability formulas depend on what physical building blocks, interactions, and physical cycles, you could say, would need to be used to cause a conceptual effect. Your brain has 6 ways it can structure thoughts, 6 shapes that can guide your stamina to have 6 consequences. There are 6 ways your stamina can be spent based on how they would impact or target parts of cycles. If you use your brain's RAM to write a really big set of instructions to have your aura follow a complicated sequence of these shapes, you can zoom out on the combined effect so it looks like a conceptual ability. But this means while you can design a Hatsu to do anything, they come with 3 limitations. You can't guarantee their effects, their formulas have to fit within your brain's capacity, and they depend on your ability to actually structure your thoughts in these shapes, which is the hardest one to work around because the way you're wired determines the shape you naturally think in. It's not what you think about, but the actual way your comprehension of what you think about is structured in the first place. That's why everyone has one of 6 Nen categories from birth, and even if everything about the environment they're born in or upbringing they have shapes their thoughts in a different way, from the outside, all it can do is give them an equal affinity for an adjacent category. And no matter how much they train, they can only use another category at a fraction of the efficiency. This is why the number 1 most important rule when designing a Hatsu, at least to me, is considering who's going to be learning it. Each person has 1 or 2 Hatsu pieces they can train and mass program into a circuit in a reasonable amount of time. And on top of this, they might have specific concepts or ways of thinking that would naturally be occupying their brain's RAM already based on how they go about their lives. So they can incorporate these larger structures of thought into their ability to save on the RAM cost, output intensity, and time it takes to learn. You know, I'm hearing it now. I talk in really roundabout ways. But for example, if you've used arrows your whole life and have built the mental muscle memory to envision their trajectories, keep their shapes in mind, and apply various substances to them, it's reasonable for someone like Pockle, who isn't a well-rounded genius, to develop a Hatsu, if it largely runs off those mental muscles and applies the building block effect of their natural category. Pockle's an emitter though, so his whole deal is that his feelings can cause him to act without thinking. Conjuration is the opposite category, where their feelings cause them to start rationalizing stuff. So most conjurers grow up to be sticklers for rules their feelings motivated them to think about and cling to that they could then never move past or care to question. For our first custom conjurer example, let's say there's someone who's grown up sheltered and supported, where they've been read picture books to learn life lessons and have been taught to think about environmental sustainability and that they're free to express themselves creatively. If they grow up taking some of the ideas in certain picture books that have shared themes about escapism to heart, and they can never get certain imaginative visuals out of their head, and at the same time they've built the muscle memory to look at the ecosystems behind the environments they see to stay aware of how those ecosystems would try to balance out around long-term impacts, they could develop a Hatsu based on where the wild things are, taking a surface illustration like a wallpaper of a forest and slowly conjuring an Nen space from that imagines an ecosystem of higher detail Nen beasts and plant life based on the illustrations that inspired it, where changes to the conjured elements from their artificial circle of life, passing nutrients down the food chain, would rearrange the parts of the original image they branch from. They'd save on stamina cost because instead of needing to always have the Nen constructs fully conjured, their actual logic can always be recorded by the positions of the pieces of paper or paint of the original illustration and embodied by the singular concept of a broader flow of an ecosystem that would have various categories of things in it, but wouldn't need to conjure any individuals within those categories until they're useful. If the user wants to shuffle the pieces of a picture like pixels on a screen, they could conjure part of the Nen space as need be and manifest elements within it to try to impact the hypothetical wider ecosystem through changes to them. If they want to be able to consistently conjure an animal or plant with simple but custom physical traits they could tailor over time, they could turn a preserved illustration into an ecosystem and slowly extract the type of thing they want to have temporarily exist in the real world. And if they ever want to override the ecosystem to cause a massive change immediately, then as a reckless last resort, they can take after something like Harold and the Purple Crayon and conjure a tool that lets them scribble on the illustration, idle transfigure conjurations within the Nen space, or immediately open doorways at the cost of accidentally reshaping too much of the illustration and changing too many details to ever return to that balance of the ecosystem again, because they need pictures with more detail and higher resolution than standard printing to make the most of. So the most effective images are the hardest to mass produce or copy. Conjuration is a very tricky category to balance because you almost need to use another category with it for its effect to do anything, and its own effect is inefficient to manifest. It's my favorite because it can potentially do anything, and the building block behind conjurer abilities is the most useful for what I'd want to do with any Nen category. But that comes with making it one of the most rigid and conditional hassles, and that's only fun for me in the same way that I like medical ninjutsu. Every category is good in its own way, so the different ones are better or worse for different people. Emitters can make something work from a distance, which is so useful I'm saving it for the end of the series. Enhancers are the best at using the position-based optimization of Nen and amplifying their existing strengths that revolve around them to power through any conditions, and transmuters can tailor their strength to make use of different condition opportunities. Because while emission preserves a cycle through changes to its wider environment, and enhancement pours its energy into a cycle to amplify it, transmutation twists a cycle to create new functionality through it. The building block effect of conjuration is that aside from position, it doesn't have to care about what's come before it, because it creates a new, fully custom cycle from scratch. The only problem is that the physical world is made up of how different cycles are interconnected with each other. Manipulation is called that because it's effective at directly hijacking control of things, because its building block effect is that it hooks a cycle up to a wider one, like some set of instructions it stores in the user's excess aura. You can control somebody's body without controlling their mind, and it's first come first serve, since systems tend to influence each other indirectly as they collide and chain react into each other. Your thoughts chain react into movements made by your body. But with manipulation Nen, you can seize direct control of something by directly hooking it up to a circuit you can customize. It overrides whatever naturally affects your target, for example the thoughts that lead to the movements of someone's body, because the system you've hooked up puts its own weight into guaranteeing the target system's behavior and causes it before a chain reaction can. So manipulation's strength is that it increases in scale the most efficiently for overpowering and seizing control of targets. My point is that conjuration doesn't do this. Conjuration creates a custom cycle from your aura, but it doesn't directly hook the world around it up to how that cycle is supposed to work. So you're relying on things in your environment that can naturally chain from the way your conjuration behaves, by themselves. This is what makes conjuration the most conditional category, because while you can create something that's not in your environment already, it relies completely on the other elements of your environment naturally responding to whatever it specifically is, in a way that you're looking for. You can make a phone that's supposed to connect you to someone with traits of your choosing, but who knows what methods of communication would actually reach them, and what obstacles could be between the two of you. You don't even know what they're doing, they might not even be in range, so when you conjure a phone, there might be nothing available to use the ability with. This type of power just makes the phone a spine some custom process of analysis can be centered through, and doesn't come with the ability to mass produce phones for your allies, no matter how much excess life energy you have. Because even worse for conjuration, whatever you conjure is actively held together in your RAM, which means every single detail adds to the cost, so even if two objects are identical, if their structures matter, then their data sizes are separate when you're conjuring both of them. The only exception to the fact you can't mass produce whatever you've learned to conjure would be if what you conjure is some conceptual effect that just manifests as loose Nen constructs to make the way the effect is carried out even easier for a conjurer, since it concentrates and further further centers the relevant interactions with the physical world through ideas of collisions and shape and movement. So because the phone ability is sustaining this abstract circuit of scanning the nearby area for targets through the phone instead of the phone manifesting through it, I'd bet that based on the way you've ingrained the Hatsu, you can't summon a bunch of phones to shield you from physical attacks, but you might be able to learn to conjure different additional devices or technology that facilitate the other parts of communication between you and your target, or that help the scan in the first place. That was also really roundabout. To summarize, as a conjurer, your ability wastes a lot of your memory to learn and is very limited in what it can do, so you have to rely on finding the right things around you to use it with. So for our second custom conjurer example, let's say someone doesn't have the talent to visualize cycles of ecosystems efficiently enough for their amount of brain power to be able to use that first idea. With nothing but a plain conjurer's potential, I would recommend learning to conjure a wrench. That would be less of a precise physical object, because you can jam it into a surface without causing actual damage, and more a manifestation that facilitates physical interactions through it. So borrowing from transmutation, which is the adjacent category you can use, by twisting the wrench instead of turning it, you can build up strain in the parts of your target object that would be impacted from the spot you've placed the wrench in, letting you lock chosen components of your target together and apply physical force to all of them at once without relying on emission or manipulation. So you could jam a wrench into a plastic chair and twist it to make it sturdier while the wrench stays in it. You could jam a wrench into a foldable chair to unfold it so it stays that way even when you get rid of the wrench, or you could twist a wrench in a wooden chair to apply force with the grain across the whole thing and split it apart more easily. And since the wrench would be facilitating this channel of force from your physical actions to the parts of the target, it would use considerably less brain power to conjure, and the ability wouldn't be reliant on a specific one. So with experience and enough stamina, you could probably afford to summon up to a dozen or so. And if you ever surpass your potential and can afford to learn some manipulation or emission, then the ability could level up in a different way, because you could directly hook up overarching qualities of your target to the wrench instead of relying on a connected chain of physical impact from the point of contact. But the immediate value of the Hatsu is that if you're self-aware that you have the tendency to be a stickler and need a bit of rigidity in your life to find out what you want to do or grow stronger, you're creating rigid stepping stones so you can work with the environment on your own terms, but these stepping stones are individual pieces that don't have to be connected to each other, giving you just enough leeway to expose yourself to new ideas and opportunities between and through them. If you want to be a surgeon, wouldn't it be useful to direct where physical force is applied to your target, and then hold openings in place without relying on human precision or clamping them in a way that concentrates force in one specific spot? While they're tiny wrenches, they're functionally a lot more like conceptual footholds to pursue whatever you want, minimize complications, or see new ways you can grow, as long as you're not looking for a role that requires combat. And this brings us to the last thing I'd consider for Hatsu design, which is how people approach their special abilities. Hatsu are about a consequence you want to be able to achieve from a complex logical sequence of applying your life energy in 6 rigid ways, which means if somebody's aura is applied to the same target or guarding against the same thing, you'd end up with a tug of war. No matter how you design it, your ability is never guaranteed to have the consequence on the physical world you intend. But no one's ever guaranteed to be successful in anything. There can always be some complication or rigging, and you're not omniscient, so you can never be sure of what will actually be the right move to accomplish your goal. But when things look tough, do winners abandon all reason and flail around because for all they know, random arm movements can lead to a victory? They don't, because even if every opportunity is a crossroad, inaction is also a choice. So when you're out of options and you can't see a guarantee of victory because you have no reference for what to do, the action you can take is to pause and take the risk of not doing anything yet to find something that you do have control over and a reliable chance to win with. Nen lets you spend excess stamina to stretch the actions you can perform to make the most of something you can work with for the sake of some goal. When Base kisses someone, she's already good at using people's feelings to cut off and mess with their thought processes in her favor, so she can target her injection of aura through something that's not as likely to be guarded when she does it, and then strike the victim's mental systems that they're not as likely to normally be guarding. So, with Hatsu, she's making her tactical, conceptual, non-Hatsu ability to manipulate people through their feelings toward her more reliable to activate and capable of controlling them to a greater and longer degree once it does. The same way people still need air to breathe or light to see, they need sound and an immeasurable number of psychological processes to interpret what they hear that they can't guard or control all of. Music, stern instructions, and ASMR impact people especially. So while Melody's music doesn't have to reach everyone or reach them in the same way, sounds travel far and music has a typically unguarded effect on people, so it opens the door for her to do various things when it comes to adjusting their mood or headspace. Manipulation is reliable when it stretches across unguarded systems to gain a lock over related processes vulnerable to them and hook them up to direct instructions. Everything is about optimization, because it's not that a Hatsu is guaranteed to achieve its intended conceptual effect. It's that when there's no guarantee, it makes sense to structure and condense abilities into sequences of rigid rules, because for each person's unique strengths and goals, there will be areas of activities they can work with and engineer, or make sure they can spot or take with them in any environment, task, or scenario they're going to take on. In Uvojin's case, it's that anything that can affect him revolves around his physical body, so he can boost that to be unstoppable in anything. Whether you give your Hatsu algorithm conditions for it to try to achieve forceful or complex effects under affordable circumstances, or you avoid giving it conditions and use your own skill to make sure its attempted but open effect does the trick, Hatsu design is about finding a specific type of external system or concept that most people don't guard against, and that you can optimize the chances of you being able to meet conditions for and successfully accomplish results with. The essence of Hatsu design is that the chain reactions you try to trigger with your ability aren't guaranteed to be successful, but it's about turning that unpredictability into a long shot, and learning how to take advantage of what you naturally have control over, so the ability you make uses your natural inner affinities to take advantage of an external factor you can probabilistically maintain control over in a way that helps you achieve some life goal. So as our third custom conjurer example, if I were a conjurer, it could go one of two ways. Using my normal mental muscle memory and thought processes, the easiest thing would be to make train tracks in the floor, and then, now that they've been railroaded, move cars of a roller coaster or dummies back and forth across them to simulate what Kohaku does with plants and melty blood. If you think of it like a carousel rather than a roller coaster, it's about trapping something where it is to keep it stable instead of traveling far distances, so the roller coaster train would be something to hold on to travel a distance I've already covered and should be able to walk anyway, in case for whatever reason I'm having a hard time following through with that. And while the dummies could gain simple joints and gears for movement patterns, they'd be looser embodiments of physical force by default, and only apply potentially temporary damage through those added features that could be selectively undone to make up for a lack of natural precision, dealing even less damage than a plain aura attack, because some of the force would be spent containing the potential damage to choose what parts to spend the rest of that energy on to make permanent. Now, I don't think I'd have the potential to learn this in the first place, but it does leave the possibility open that if I do somehow manage to surpass my limits, I could incorporate a small amount of emission so that I could embed those train tracks anywhere my aura touches on its own and extend them without having to be right there. There's a lot of value in applying your opposite category in your Hatsu, but it's kind of counterintuitive, because this carousel power would be equivalent to teaching yourself reverse cursed technique in a way that's wasting your potential to grow. So instead, I would take the risk to try to learn an ability that exerts power on the user and limits what they can do in the short term to keep their options open. Going back to Krollo's 6700 phone, because it's looking for a target in an environment where the actual nature of the area it's deployed in can vary. It's not guaranteed to find anyone, the ritual to meet its condition can vary in length, and then all it does is give you instructions for how you can make contact with them manually. If we use a similar approach, but make a trade-off where it surreptitiously limits the user's options on top of forcing them to still achieve their goal manually, as a way to guarantee that the option to achieve the goal always stays open until the ability deactivates, which also means the ability has more of a presence that's vulnerable to exorcism and puts some of its own sturdiness on the line for this guarantee to remain, then we can take advantage of a habit of holding oneself back in place, a habit of continuing to look for different complications, and a habit of putting the cart before the horse to make a Hatsu that takes time to come up with a list of instructions to follow, so that no matter how long or tedious the list has to be, the user can achieve a goal they want once it's followed, and the possibility for them to complete the checklist remains open as long as they have the stamina to keep the ability active. Personally, if I tried to use this for anything substantial, like making a successful novel the way the Patreon members are hoping, I would run out of stamina and RAM from having to conjure such a long checklist. But for a hunter, the better they get the hang of Nen, and the more they learn about the world, the less tedious the list would have to be, because their special ability could apply more Hatsu effects through the steps they complete, and the less unknowns they'd have to account for with their actions. If you don't get in your own head, and instead leave the analysis to an Nen beast, it can probably process the world and come to a general practical conclusion for how your actions can lead you to a pillar of human or societal causality, and then rely on that pillar to achieve the goal you're after. So even though it may take a while to come up with the list in the first place, that's not the part I think would be an issue for the ability. Anything is possible, and the norm is for some streams of possibility to always remain open. It's more that it might think you're so weak and vulnerable, the steps it knows you could follow to achieve your goal would be so numerous you'd run out of stamina trying to conjure a simple checklist to express them. Also, people can always target your ability to keep your Hatsu active. So if you have higher stamina and use it to create 2, or at most 3 checklists for your limited RAM that make it more efficient for the Hatsu to surreptitiously attack and restrict someone other than you for their combined purposes and avenues, you're swinging your Hatsu use around and making your power much easier for counter abilities to latch onto, which there could be tons of for what you could run into, given how ambitious your goals might be and the number of toes you might step on. But those are just 4 examples of what I would do with Conjuration. I thought it would be fun to try out, so I challenged 6 members of the Patreon to come up with Hatsu designs that incorporated Conjuration for a prize of getting a custom video or being in one. The basic rules were you'd get 5 points for how feasible the algorithm would be, 5 points for how tactical the power would be, and 5 points for how reasonable it would be for the character you designed it for to develop. And then tiebreaker points for detail. If the algorithm makes sense, you get 5 stars already, but if you can make almost the entire thing run off Conjuration, you get a tiebreaker point. If the ability is inherently useful, you get 5 stars without having to explain it, but if you do go into detail about how your character can personally make use of it, then you get a tiebreaker point. And you don't need to justify a Hatsu with character details to get 5 stars if anyone can learn it, but if you do, then you get a tiebreaker point, for a total of 3 that only make a difference if you have the same score as somebody else. So, paraphrasing the 6 entries. First is Heartstring by CG. The core idea is that you're conjuring intangible strings between nearby targets, and an overall prediction for the near future of the way those targets will end up interacting with each other in the space where the ability is used, based on the strings connecting them. The user would be a paranormal hunter and fortune teller who, fitting their character concept and Nen category, would use a significant location where something meaningful has happened to anchor the ability, and tarot readings within that space to predict how different targets within that location will relate to each other and create those intangible strings that would then have them figuratively gravitate toward each other so that they interact in some unclear way that matches their tarot reading by the next day. The user can attach strings from their own body to targets within the vicinity without needing a tarot reading, and they can also tailor what's destined to happen by messing with the strings a bit. But the fortune, only based on a tarot reading and these simple string connections, is so vague for the sake of being flexible that they can't tell what it will mean for sure, and if something won't return to the location in the time it would need for the fortune to come true, then a string won't be attached to it in the first place. The signature move is to bring artifacts and people related to the significance of the location with you when you go there, and perform a tarot reading on a chosen target to intertwine its near future with the other things there, creating strings to whatever other artifacts and people the future told by the tarot reading will have it interact with, which would be useful because they could use this to gain a loose sense of how a paranormal event will unfold between the pieces relevant to it, giving them the information they'd want as a paranormal hunter, but also loose reassurance of the future for anyone who'd need it, and the opportunity to tweak things in what they'd assume is their favor, since they can sever strings to have the rest of the prediction try to prevent those interactions from happening, tug strings so they happen sooner or at more controlled times, and tie strings together to entangle relationships between objects, like setting up a 20-meter radius emerald splash. If you create a string to a harpoon you've placed at the entrance to a room to tie to a string between a door and a suit of armor, then if that suit of armor comes to life the next day and breaks that door down, that fated interaction will then trigger the harpoon to fire at the suit of armor and impale it. The hard parts of the ability can all work through Conjuration, so for algorithm, I'd say it gets 5 points. As far as I understand it, it's useful for seeing how a paranormal event will play out, but not for understanding what it's really being caused by or actually resolving it, and while it can read someone's general future, it's vague enough to be unreliable. Also for combat, it's super inefficient, so for utility, I'd give it 3 points, and then because the conceptual nature of the ability is a perfect mix between how the character would think and what they would want to use Nen for, that's 5 more points with a tiebreaker. The next entry is Peluche Workshop by Fall. Its core idea is that you set up a workstation by conjuring tools and materials to build a Nen beast yourself so you can slightly customize its form, have multiple active at the same time, and make it more feasible to have slightly more variation in their abilities. Your physical actions and design skill are what are used to sew the individual materials you've conjured into the shape of a high detail plush, which acts like creating a physical circuit because some deliberate complexity is granted externally by your craftsmanship, which allows you to make a practically endless number of plushies over time, because as long as their designs are high enough quality, they can now hold themselves together on their own. Just as a result, the plushies can easily be broken. Once you're done making a plush, you fill it with stuffing by granting it some of your aura and assign it a name, which completes that circuit and lets it hold itself together, as long as the structure is decent. At this point, until it takes damage or uses up the aura you've granted it, the plush will have a life of its own, so you have to get it to want to help you by being friendly and remembering its name, because you can't control it directly since the ability isn't using any manipulation. The plush starts out friendly to you though, and will want to help you out as long as it stays that way. On top of its body, you also make a costume for the plush before you bring it to life, which is what its ability will run off of, rather than your own RAM. And there are 6 types of outfits you can assign it. Nurse carries a syringe with it, and if a Nen user voluntarily fills it with their aura, the plush can use the syringe to heal wounds. Mailman conjures a paper whenever you ask it to, that gets filled with information you want to communicate to someone when you pour your aura into it, and the amount and clarity of information depend on the amount of aura you've used. Once the paper's filled, the mailman will try to carry it to the recipient, but anyone can open it, and the information will be beamed into their head, giving them a headache if the quality is low. It can also only hold 2 letters at a time. Chemist can materialize just about any substance there is by transmuting your aura, but it needs to perform a ritual where it researches the substance by giving you 2 flasks that you have to fill with the aura that's going to be transmuted, and the quality of the result, as well as the time it takes to complete, depend on how much aura you've put in the flasks and how complex the target substance is. Musician has the most unruly personality and the ability to control small animals and bugs. Engineer is anxious about the well-being of machinery and will ask anyone nearby for aura that it can use to make fasteners and tools for repair, as it has the ability to make pieces and tools to fix things. And Manager, the last one, can guide the other plushies if there's a lack of coordination between them. The quality of a plush and its ability also depend on the amount of aura the user spent to bring it to life, which the user would only have the stamina to make 2 reliable ones of per day. Peluche Workshop's careful to run almost purely off conjuration in the first half, and makes a lot of sense, so I'd give it 5 points for the algorithm. It's also incredibly useful if you want a non-combatant workforce. You just have to do a purge whenever they start running out of gas and realizing they're expendable, so I'd give it another 5 points for the utility. And while the ability would be a bit difficult for a lot of people to pull off, I could easily see it working for a conjurer who really likes plushies and arts and crafts, and who's internalized the steps involved, because if they think of stuffed animals as friends, then that ties the whole thing together, because every day they could be subconsciously powering the minimal fundamentals required to reinforce the complex parts of this Hatsu and keep those plushies alive. It would take a specific type of person to be able to learn this kind of ability, but because that's never justified in the actual description, I'd give the character justification 4 points. The third entry is No Perfect North by Monty. The core idea is that you're conjuring a compass with detachable needles that float around when you tell them you have something you're trying to avoid losing, and point at different actions or opportunities or directions you could take that would preserve whatever you don't want to lose the most. You have to state out loud what struggle you're dealing with, at least 2 realistic options you can think of to preserve the thing you want as much as possible, and then the specific thing you want to preserve. If there's a perfect solution that doesn't involve any loss, the ability won't activate. But if every solution you've chosen is grounded and has some amount of trade-off, the needles will point to their next steps and gesture differently depending on the risks and outcomes. Whichever needle ends up pointing more clearly than the others is the option that will preserve your target the most out of the solutions you've provided, but it doesn't mean it will lead to the best outcome for you overall. If the user can't go through with what they think the needle's pointing at, the ability will deactivate. But if they say the phrase, "I accept this loss," they can improve their composure and aura effectiveness because they're no longer mentally hesitating. It's a really straightforward ability that conjures a process of analysis around the compass to give loose guidance over time, and the only other benefit is psychological, so it gets 5 points and a tiebreaker point for the algorithm. It's efficient and has grounded value, and the description also goes into detail about how the user can make the most of it. so that's another 5 points and a tiebreaker. And last but not least, while the ability is straightforward enough for anyone to likely be able to learn, the description also spends a lot of time explaining how it's meant for someone with an analytical and theoretically practical way of thinking, but who needs to stop splitting their energy considering different possibilities and just learn to force their way through a dilemma. So as our first perfect score, No Perfect North gets another 5 points and a tiebreaker. The fourth entry is Dinner Bell by Ziggy. Based on the idea of Pavlovian conditioning, you conjure a bell, and if you select a target in earshot and ring that bell 3 times they feel the same emotion, sensation, or mood, then every next time you ring it, you can repeat that feeling or state of mind at the maximum intensity they felt it at of the 3 times you met the condition. If you want to cause something else on command for the same target, you'll have to discard the previous thing you've conditioned them to feel, and start the process over again for the new feeling. But you can use this Hatsu on any number of people, and they can have different responses to the bell than each other. So because the ability is just a straightforward combination of conjuration and manipulation, it gets 5 algorithm points. Because it's so appealing, one of the other patrons went out of their way to explain why they would want it in depth, it gets 5 utility points and a tiebreaker point. And because it's using the general tendencies and ideas behind a simple principle to imprint a repeatable effect, it gets 5 points for character justification without having to come up with the wielder. The fifth entry is the Thieves Toolkit by Duck. The toolkit is a ritual to create supernatural rules and effects across groups of objects by picking at least 3 objects or batches of objects that can be used together in a magic trick, and then physically engraving the same sigil made up of the letters of the user's name 10 times on each object or batch involved. After this, the components of the trick can be used together to trigger a supernatural effect the user decided before marking them, and even if the sigils are somehow removed from the components, they can never be used for another effect. The specific trick entered into the competition involves a toad-shaped gourd, which has 10 sigils engraved on the inside, 4 eyes made of gemstones on the gourd, which have 10 sigils between them, and 10 rings that all have to be worn at the same time and have 1 sigil each. The ritual to trigger the effect is to tap the correct ring, which there are 4 of, to the correct eye on the gourd, which will add 1 of 4 substances to any water being poured from the gourd at that time. The yellow eye adds ethanol, the black eye adds coffee, the purple eye adds menthol, and the red eye adds capsaicin. I'd say it's a strong idea, so 5 points for the algorithm. For the purposes given in its explanation, the trick and overall toolkit are reasonably effective, so 4 points for utility. And because the character's backstory explains why a conjurer would develop to think in such a specific way, I'd give it 5 points and a tiebreaker point for character justification. As an honorable mention, one of the mods of the Patreon Discord server made a conjuration Hatsu of their own. So here is Crown Jewel by Photo. The user can conjure a gem on the forehead of a target, which the target can then concentrate their thoughts into to make it easier for people they talk to understand what they mean. Anyone can donate aura to the gem to make it more durable and effective, and because it improves communication by making the user's thoughts clearer to others, it can also have the added effect of making them more assertive or charismatic. Although if the gem is damaged, its power will be reduced, and it can be targeted to cause the wearer pain. Very straightforward idea that incorporates conjuration, so I'd give it 5 points. The description explains the utility, so I'd give it 5 points and a tiebreaker point, and it makes perfect sense for the user described, so that's another 5 points and a tiebreaker point. For our last entry, we have Desperate Prayer by Moderate Name Length on the Patreon Discord server, which I'm mentioning last because it was turned in after the window for the challenge closed, but it's fine, because all the patrons would get accommodations for procrastinating. Again, this is just a small-scale challenge prototype, because I wasn't sure if people would like doing this. Desperate Prayer is for a manipulator who uses conjuration to analyze their surroundings and create a simplified, non-physical model of how it thinks the pieces of their environment affect each other, so the user's unassuming actions can automatically be guided and surreptitiously influenced to do what the ability would think would be in their favor for the near future, by entangling the pieces of that environment and centering most of the ability's impact and manipulation on the user themselves. From their perspective, they can wish they did some small action differently in hindsight, and either find out that the present is more favorable than what they'd thought, or see the consequences be counteracted immediately after. So the Hatsu would be running passively, but be influenced by the user's intent and concentration. And it works best if the user closes their eyes and lets the Hatsu control their body's movements for up to 5 seconds, kind of like Tsaridnik and Killua. I'd say the effect is loose and reasonable enough to get 5 points for algorithm. The utility is well explained, because as mentioned in the description, a bad student could scan the area around them when taking a test, so their random guesses are manipulated to have them pick whatever answers the Hatsu's seen better students pick, giving the entry 5 points for utility and 1 tiebreaker point, and for that same reason, it would get 5 points for character justification and 1 more tiebreaker point. So yeah, the winner was No Perfect North by Monty! Hooray! Everybody celebrate! All of them were really solid though. I had to grasp at straws to find reasons to give them different points. But now that people know how I'm judging these, we can make a larger competition in the future. Cause I liked this, and I'd do this again if people feel the same. So yeah, leave a like if this was a good idea, join the Patreon if you like more direct and behind the scenes stuff, subscribe if you like these videos, and if you could, please super thank, because it does really help out, and it makes more of these videos possible. With that said, see you next time.